Silver Shores was peaceful until Karen Crane declared war. When she set her sights on Buck Randolph's boat, she had no idea she was picking a fight with the wrong man. A battle of wills was about to begin. Baxter Buck Randolph had always been a man who valued his independence. After years of working in high-stakes corporate finance, he had walked away from it all, using his well-earned savings to buy a house with a private dock on the serene shores of Silver Shores Lake. His property was a dream, spacious, peaceful, and entirely his own. The dock, his most prized feature, extended into the water, where his old but well-maintained boat, Sea Fury, was moored. It wasn't flashy or new, but it was reliable, a vessel he had personally restored and modified over the years. For Buck, his boat wasn't just a pastime. It was a piece of his soul, a symbol of the freedom he had fought to reclaim. He spent his mornings tinkering with the engine, his afternoons out on the water, and his evenings with a drink in hand, enjoying the sunsets from his deck. It was the kind of life he had always wanted. That is, until Karen Crane decided it was her business to ruin it. Karen was the self-appointed ruler of the Silver Shores Homeowners Association. With her crisp white blouses, pearl necklaces, and an ever-present clipboard, she carried herself with the authority of a dictator, inspecting her domain. To her, rules were not just guidelines. They were divine law, and she had made it her mission to enforce them with an iron fist. It wasn't long before Buck found himself on her radar. One afternoon, while tightening some bolts on the Sea Fury, he heard the unmistakable sound of Karen's heels clicking against his dock. He sighed before even turning around. "Mr. Randolph," Karen announced, her voice laced with artificial politeness. "We need to talk about your boat." Buck barely glanced at her before returning to his work. "Oh? Something wrong with it? Not with the boat itself," she sniffed, "but with its status within the community." Buck put down his wrench and turned. Arms crossed. "Status?" Karen produced a stack of neatly printed documents. According to the Silver Shores HOA bylaws, all boats docked within our community must be registered with the Silver Shores Yacht Club. You've been here for a while, but I see no record of your membership. As president, I'm here to offer you the necessary forms. Buck looked at her, then at the papers, then back at her. "Let me stop you right there. I'm not a member of your HOA. My property predates this entire neighborhood. I'm under no obligation to follow your rules, and I certainly don't need to register my boat with any club." Karen's lips thinned. "You may not be a member, but your presence affects the aesthetic harmony of the community. A boat outside of the official registry creates complications." Buck chuckled. "You mean it messes with your sense of control?" Karen inhaled sharply. "This is not a request, Mr. Randolph. If you refuse to comply, you'll be subject to escalating fines. You may even find yourself in legal trouble." Buck stepped forward, towering over her with the ease of a man who had no patience for bureaucracy. "Lady, let me make this real simple. My property, not your business. My boat, not your problem. And your fines," he leaned in slightly, "worthless." Karen's face flushed red. "I'll see about that," she hissed before turning on her heel and stomping away. As Buck watched her go, he shook his head. He had dealt with power-hungry bureaucrats before, but Karen Crane was something else. He had no doubt that this wouldn't be the last he heard from her. And he was right. This was only the beginning. The very next morning, Buck woke up to find a bright yellow envelope taped to his front door. The HOA's logo was stamped on the front like an official government decree. He ripped it open, already knowing who was behind it. Notice of non-compliance. The letter detailed several violations Buck had allegedly committed, including 1. Unauthorized docking of a watercraft within Silver Shores. 2. Failure to register said watercraft with the Yacht Club. 3. Obstruction of community aesthetic standards. At the bottom was a fine of $500 with the potential for additional legal action if he refused to comply. Buck snorted. Obstruction of community aesthetic standards? What the hell does that even mean? It didn't take long for him to spot Karen standing across the street, watching his reaction from behind a pair of oversized sunglasses. He didn't give her the satisfaction of looking annoyed. Instead, he calmly walked back inside, grabbed a red marker, and wrote across the notice in large, bold letters, "Return to sender, fraudulent charges." He then walked over to Karen's house and taped it right to her own front door. That should have been the end of it. But Karen Crane never took no for an answer. By the end of the week, the harassment escalated. First came the complaints to the city. Buck got visits from various local inspectors checking for zoning violations, improper property maintenance, and even unauthorized water use. Every single claim was bogus, but it wasted hours of his time as he was forced to escort confused city workers around his property, showing them his entirely legal dock and boat. Then came the anonymous calls to the police. At least 3 times officers showed up after reports of suspicious activity near his dock. Each time, Buck had to explain that the only suspicious activity going on was Karen peering through her blinds like a nosy hawk. The final straw came when Buck caught HOA contractors attempting to remove the obstruction, which was, of course, his docked boat. He had been enjoying a late afternoon on his deck, sipping a beer, when he heard the unmistakable hum of a motorized winch. Peering over the railing, he saw 2 men in HOA-branded shirts attaching ropes to the Sea Fury, preparing to tow it away. Buck flew down the steps so fast the beer in his hand nearly spilled. "The hell do you think you're doing?" he barked, his voice booming across the water. One of the men, a nervous-looking guy in his 50s, stammered, We were given orders to relocate this boat. HOA regulation." "HOA regulation?" Buck repeated, his disbelief quickly turning into rage. "You realize you're standing on private property trying to steal my damn boat, right?" The man turned pale. His partner, realizing they had royally screwed up, immediately started unhooking the ropes. Buck pulled out his phone and snapped a few photos. "You got exactly 10 seconds to get the hell off my dock before I call the sheriff and report this as grand theft." The men didn't even hesitate. They scrambled back onto their boat and sped away, leaving Karen, who had been watching from a distance, to pretend she had nothing to do with it. But Buck wasn't done. That night he installed security cameras all around his dock, with a live feed directly to his phone. If Karen thought she could pull another stunt, she was in for a rude awakening. When he was finished, he sat back with a grin, watching the camera feed on his phone. "Let's see what you try next, Karen." It was nearly midnight when Karen Crane decided to make her move. The security cameras had already caught her snooping around the dock earlier that day, eyeing Buck's boat like a child sizing up a cookie jar. But Buck had gone to bed without much concern. He figured she'd cool off after her last humiliation. He underestimated her arrogance. Dressed in dark clothes and accompanied by Jeff Hansen, the newly appointed chairman of the Silver Shores Yacht Club, Karen tiptoed onto Buck's dock. The 2 of them worked fast, untying the ropes, securing the Sea Fury, and pushing off from the pier. Karen smirked as she took the wheel. "If Randolph refuses to follow the rules," she whispered, "then he doesn't deserve to keep this boat here." Jeff, shifting nervously beside her, muttered, "Are you sure this is a good idea?" "This is technically—" "Shut up and start the engine," Karen snapped. But that was their first mistake. Buck had removed the engine's primary fuel line earlier that week for repairs, leaving just enough gas in the reserve tank to keep the motor running for about 10 minutes. Karen, of course, had no idea. As they eased out onto the lake, she laughed triumphantly, imagining how furious Buck would be when he woke up and found his dock empty. She could already picture the HOA's next board meeting, where she would gloat about how she had personally solved the Randolph problem. But then, the engine sputtered. Karen frowned and twisted the throttle. Nothing. The low hum of the motor choked, coughed, and then died completely. The boat drifted aimlessly in the middle of the lake, the only sounds now the soft lapping of the water against the hull and the distant chirping of crickets along the shoreline. "What the hell did you do?" Karen barked, glaring at Jeff. I didn't do anything." Jeff panicked, fumbling with the ignition switch. It just died." Karen's stomach sank. "Try starting it again." Jeff twisted the key over and over, but all they got was the empty whine of a dead engine. Then the wind picked up. Clouds rolled across the moon, darkening the lake. The gentle breeze that had been pleasant only minutes ago turned into a strong gust, pushing the boat further away from shore. The current pulled them toward the rocky eastern edge of the lake, where jagged stones jutted out from the water like the teeth of a hungry beast. Karen gripped the wheel. "Use the oars!" Jeff opened the storage compartment, only to find it empty. Buck, of course, had removed everything valuable from the boat while working on repairs. No oars, no emergency radio, no backup fuel, nothing. Panic set in. They drifted closer to the rocks. The water gurgled ominously around them, waves slapping against the hull with increasing force. Karen grabbed her phone. "We have to call for help!" But when she checked her signal, there was nothing. The reception in the middle of the lake was notoriously bad, especially near the cliffs. Then, the first crash came. The boat slammed into a half-submerged rock, jolting Karen and Jeff forward. The sound of wood and fiberglass splintering echoed across the lake. Water rushed in through the damaged hull. "Shit!" Jeff shouted. "We're taking on water!" Karen's mind raced. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Another loud crack, another hit against the rocks. And then the sea fury began to sink. The icy lake water rushed in faster than Karen or Jeff could react. Within seconds, the floor of the Sea Fury was submerged, and the boat tilted dangerously to one side. Karen shrieked, scrambling to grab anything solid as she lost her footing and crashed into the side railing. Jeff, panicking, threw himself toward the bow, trying to keep the boat steady, but it was no use. The waves dragged them further into the rocky shallows, and with one final gut-wrenching crack, the hull split apart. They were going under. Karen shrieked again. "Do something, Jeff!" "What the hell do you want me to do?" he yelled back. With no other choice, they jumped into the freezing water. Jeff hit first, flailing as he tried to stay afloat, while Karen landed with an undignified splash, shrieking the moment the cold hit her skin. The remains of the Sea Fury groaned as they drifted apart, pieces of wood and fiberglass bobbing around them like shipwreck debris. The boat had been completely destroyed. Soaked and shivering, Karen fought to stay afloat. The weight of her designer clothes dragged her down, and her perfectly styled blonde bob was now a tangled, dripping mess. Jeff, gasping for air, reached for a large floating piece of the boat, clinging to it like his life depended on it. And then, spotlights flooded the water. A search and rescue boat from the Silver Shores Patrol was speeding toward them, its sirens cutting through the darkness. Someone had seen the wreck, or heard the commotion, and called for help. 2 officers pulled them out of the lake. Jeff collapsed onto the deck, coughing up water, while Karen lay flat on her back, her chest heaving, mascara running down her face in black streaks. And just when she thought the night couldn't get any worse, she heard a slow, sarcastic clap. Karen turned her head and froze. Buck Randolph was standing at the dock, arms crossed, a smirk on his face. "Well, well, well," Buck called out. "If it isn't Captain Karen and her first mate dumbass." Karen sputtered, trying to sit up. This is your fault," she screeched, pointing a shaking, waterlogged finger at him. Buck barked out a laugh. "My fault! You stole my damn boat." One of the officers turned to him. "Mr. Randolph, we got a call about an unregistered vessel in distress." Buck held up his phone, pulling up the live footage from his dock's security cameras. The screen showed Karen and Jeff sneaking onto the boat, untying it, and pushing off into the water. The officers stared at the screen. Karen, still dripping wet, went pale. Buck tilted his head. "Now, correct me if I'm wrong, officers, but I believe the legal term for that is grand theft boat." Jeff let out a groan, dropping his head into his hands. Karen, still shaking from the cold and humiliation, had no words. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs as people settled into their seats, eager to witness the trial that had rocked Silver Shores. Everyone had heard about Karen Crane's midnight boat heist and disastrous voyage, but now they would see her face justice. At the defendant's table, Karen sat stiffly, her usual air of superiority replaced by something far less composed. Her hands were clasped so tightly that her knuckles were white, and she kept shifting uncomfortably in her seat. The designer suit she wore, a desperate attempt to maintain her image, couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes or the nervous twitch in her jaw. Buck Randolph, on the other hand, was the picture of confidence. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, exuding the calm amusement of a man who already knew the outcome. He had dealt with corporate sharks, high-stakes negotiations, and bureaucratic nonsense before, but nothing quite as ridiculous as this. The judge, a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes, took her seat and glanced at the files before her. She sighed. "This is certainly unique." The prosecutor wasted no time, stepping forward with an air of quiet authority. "Your Honor, the evidence in this case is overwhelming. The defendant, Karen Crane, trespassed onto private property, stole Mr. Randolph's boat, and in an act of stunning incompetence, destroyed it. The entire crime was caught on security cameras, and we have sworn statements from officers, the Silver Shores Patrol, and even her accomplice, Jeffrey Hansen, who has already pleaded guilty." Karen's head snapped toward Jeff, who sat 2 rows back, avoiding eye contact. That spineless idiot. She had begged him to deny everything, to claim it was all a misunderstanding. But instead, he folded like a cheap lawn chair. Karen's lawyer, a nervous young man who clearly regretted taking this case, cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client maintains that she had no intention of stealing the boat. She was merely borrowing it." Buck let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Borrowing it? Without permission? In the middle of the night?" Karen's lawyer visibly floundered. She was under the impression that... But Karen couldn't take it anymore. She shot up from her seat, her composure shattering like glass. "This is a setup!" she shrieked. The courtroom fell silent. The judge blinked. "Excuse me?" Karen turned, wild-eyed, pointing an accusatory finger at Buck. This man has been trying to humiliate me since the day he moved in. He refuses to follow the rules, he disrespects the HOA, and..." The prosecutor cut her off. "Miss Crane, are you saying Mr. Randolph forced you to steal his boat?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish, caught in her own stupidity. The judge rubbed her temples. "Ms. Crane, I advise you to let your lawyer speak for you before you make this worse. Karen ignored her. Her whole body shook with rage. This whole community is falling apart because of people like him, she ranted. Selfish, entitled men who think they can just do whatever they want. He set me up. He probably sabotaged that boat on purpose. Buck, barely holding back laughter, gestured toward the video evidence still playing on the screen. Right. I telepathically forced you to sneak onto my dock, untie my boat, and drive it into the rocks. A snicker rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge looked mildly amused. Karen whipped around, face red with fury. You're a menace, she screamed at Buck. You and your stupid, ugly boat. It's your fault I'm here. Buck's smirk widened. Funny. I seem to recall being asleep while you were out committing grand theft. The courtroom erupted in laughter. Karen's breathing became ragged. This was not how it was supposed to go. She had pictured herself winning, crushing him, showing everyone that Karen Crane was not to be disrespected. But instead, she was being mocked, treated like a joke. The judge held up a hand, silencing the room. Her patience had worn thin. Enough, she said firmly. Ms. Crane, you not only stole and destroyed someone else's property, but your complete lack of remorse and your delusional blame-shifting make it abundantly clear that you have no respect for the law or for the people around you. Karen froze. Therefore, I am sentencing you to pay full restitution for the damage to Mr. Randolph's boat, court fees, and legal expenses. Furthermore, you are officially removed as HOA president, effective immediately. Karen's face drained of color. The judge leaned forward. And if you so much as step foot near Mr. Randolph's property again, you'll be charged with criminal trespassing. Do you understand me? Karen could barely process what was happening. Her power, gone. Her money, draining. Her reputation, shattered. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. The final nail in the coffin came when HOA board members in the audience clapped. They were glad to be rid of her. Karen felt sick. Buck, watching her slow collapse into reality, simply leaned over to his lawyer and murmured, "Well, that was fun." The rage boiled inside Karen like a storm that wouldn't pass. 2 weeks had crawled by since the humiliating disaster in court, and the reality of her situation had sunk in like a stone tied to her ankles. She was officially stripped of her HOA presidency, publicly ridiculed, and, worst of all, she now owed Buck Randolph a staggering $250,000 in damages. $250,000. $250,000. Her finances were already stretched thin. The fines, legal fees, and the costs of repairing the dock and boat had drained her accounts, and she had been forced to put her own house on the market just to stay afloat. This was his fault. That smug bastard. Sitting alone in her near-empty house, her hands trembled with fury as she scrolled through community posts. Everyone in Silver Shores was laughing at her, whispering about her downfall. Buck had ruined everything. She wouldn't let him win. Not like this. That night, just past midnight, she crept toward Buck's dock, her heart pounding in her chest. She had dressed in black, no heels this time, her hair tied back. She wasn't stealing anything this time. No, she was going to make him suffer. She pulled out a gallon of industrial-strength paint remover. Her plan was simple: destroy his newly restored boat. The thought of him waking up to see his precious sea fury, a peeling, disfigured wreck, made her smile for the first time in weeks. Carefully, she moved onto the dock, unscrewing the cap of the bottle. The moment she tilted it forward, "You really don't learn, do you, Karen?" A voice cut through the darkness like a blade. Karen froze. Her stomach dropped. From the shadows, Buck stepped forward, phone in hand, camera already recording. "Now, I could have ignored the motion sensor alerts," Buck continued, mocking amusement in his tone. "But, after all we've been through, figured I should see what the dumbest criminal in Silver Shores was up to." Karen whipped around to run. But flashing red and blue lights suddenly bathed the dock in color. She gasped as two police officers emerged from the parking lot. She had walked right into a trap. Buck folded his arms as the officers approached. "Caught her red-handed, fellas." Well, more like white-handed, since she didn't actually pour it yet. But I'd say attempted vandalism still counts. One of the officers stepped forward stern-faced. "Ms. Crane, put the container down. Slowly." Karen's breathing was ragged. Her mind raced for an excuse, a way out. But there wasn't one. She dropped the bottle. It hit the dock with a hollow thud. The final nail in Karen Crane's coffin came. The next morning, when news of her midnight vandalism attempt spread like wildfire through Silver Shores. It started with a single video, the security footage from Buck's dock. The high-definition clip captured Karen in all her pathetic glory, creeping like a raccoon in the night, only to be caught, humiliated, and arrested on the spot. Within hours, the video went viral in the community group chat. Then it hit the town's Facebook page. By noon, Karen Crane had become a local legend, for all the wrong reasons. People at the grocery store whispered behind their hands when she walked past. Parents at the school pickup line snickered behind their coffee cups. Former HOA members, the very people she had terrorized for years, sent each other memes of her mugshot. "Crane down! Local HOA tyrant arrested in pathetic revenge attempt." Breaking. Former HOA president caught red-handed in Dumbest Crime of the Year award. Karen's face burned every time she left the house. There was no recovering from this. The Silver Shores HOA held an emergency meeting that week to finalize her permanent ban from the organization. Not only had she been removed as president, but she was now barred from holding any position of power in any local HOA. The final humiliation came when she had no choice but to sell her house. With a mountain of debt from the court fines, boat restitution, and legal fees, she packed her bags and left Silver Shores for good. Buck Randolph heard about it all over a beer at the marina. "Did you hear?" one of the guys said, grinning. "Karen sold her house. She moved out to Maplewood Estates." Buck raised an eyebrow. That name sounded familiar. "Wait," another guy snorted, nearly spitting out his drink. "You mean the HOA-run Nightmare? That place makes Silver Shores look like a damn summer camp." As the group laughed, Buck pulled out his phone and looked up Maplewood Estates. The first thing he saw? A picture of their HOA president, a stocky man in a pressed suit with a clipboard clutched in his iron grip. His name? Robert Stetson. And under his list of HOA policies and enforcement records, Buck spotted something that made him grin. Zero tolerance for rule breakers. Fines strictly enforced. Violators will be held accountable with immediate legal action. Buck chuckled, shaking his head. Poetic justice. Karen Crane had escaped one HOA, only to land in the hands of a bigger tyrant. And this time, she wasn't the one in charge. Leaning back in his chair, Buck took a slow sip of his drink, watching the sun set over the water. He thought back to that first day Karen had marched onto his dock, waving papers, demanding control. He had known even then that she was trouble. But now, that trouble was somebody else's problem. And for Buck Randolph, that was the perfect ending.